The space station Nexus 7 floated in the void between three star systems, a massive hub where dozens of alien species gathered to trade, negotiate, and sometimes fight. Its corridors buzzed with activity as merchants hawked exotic goods, diplomats whispered secrets in shadowy corners, and warriors from across the galaxy tested their skills in the fighting pits. Zaraketh stood at the observation deck of the station's most prestigious arena, her scaled arms crossed as she watched the latest batch of fighters prepare for combat. As a member of the Vorthak Empire's military elite, she had seen warriors from every corner of known space. The Vorthak themselves were apex predators, standing 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws, armored scales that could deflect most energy weapons, and reflexes that made them nearly unstoppable in close combat. Her golden eyes scanned the fighters below with practiced assessment. There was Grix Vaughn, a massive Crothan whose 4 arms could crush steel. His species had conquered 17 star systems through pure physical dominance. Next to him stood Velnari, a Zenthrian whose natural camouflage abilities and venomous spines had made her people feared assassins throughout the galaxy. But then Zaraketh's attention was drawn to something that made her laugh out loud, a sharp, barking sound that echoed through the observation chamber. At the far end of the preparation area stood what appeared to be the most pathetic excuse for a warrior she had ever seen. The creature was barely 6 feet tall, with pale, soft-looking skin that seemed like it would tear at the slightest touch. It had no visible armor plating, no natural weapons, no obvious evolutionary advantages whatsoever. Its limbs were thin, almost fragile-looking, and it moved with what appeared to be complete casualness, as if it didn't understand the deadly serious nature of what was about to happen. "What is that thing?" asked Vexmore, another Vorthak officer who had joined her at the observation window. His scarred snout wrinkled in disgust as he studied the strange creature. "According to the registration files, it calls itself a human," Zaraketh replied, still chuckling. "From some backwater world called Earth. Apparently, it actually volunteered for the trials. The trials were no joke. Nexus 7's arena hosted the most brutal combat competitions in this sector of the galaxy. Warriors came here to prove themselves against the deadliest opponents available, and the survival rate was less than 30%. Only the most elite fighters from the most warlike species even dared to enter. A human, Vexmore repeated slowly, tasting the unfamiliar word. Never heard of them. What's their claim to fame? Acid blood? Psychic powers? Some kind of energy manipulation?" Zaraketh accessed her datapad and scrolled through the species file. Her laughter grew louder. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They're what the database classifies as baseline biological. No special abilities, no enhanced physical characteristics, no notable evolutionary adaptations for combat. They're not even apex predators on their own world. This was almost too good to be true. In all her years as a warrior, Zaraketh had never encountered such an obvious mismatch. The human would probably be dead within seconds of the first round beginning. She felt almost sorry for it. Almost. The truth was, Zaraketh was here on business. The Vorthak Empire was always looking for new warriors to recruit or new threats to evaluate. When species proved themselves in the trials, they often found themselves either welcomed into the Empire's military machine or marked for conquest. Either way, the Empire benefited. But this human thing represented neither opportunity nor threat. It was just going to be entertainment. Down in the preparation area, the human was checking over what appeared to be primitive equipment. Zaraketh zoomed in with her optical enhancers to get a better look. The creature wore what looked like simple fabric coverings and carried weapons that seemed almost insultingly basic. There was a long metal stick with a pointed end that her database identified as a spear, several smaller pointed objects called knives, and a curved piece of wood with a string that apparently launched small projectiles. The weapons were so primitive, they didn't even show up on the arena's threat assessment scanners. "This is going to be over before it starts," Vexmore observed. "Should we even bother watching?" Zaraketh was about to agree when something made her pause. The human's demeanor struck her as odd. Most fighters, especially those from lesser species, showed signs of nervousness, fear, or aggressive posturing when faced with the arena's challenges. They paced, they roared, they performed intimidation displays. The human was doing none of these things. It simply stood quietly, methodically checking its equipment with the same careful attention she might give to reviewing battle plans before a major campaign. There was something unsettling about its calmness, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Attention participants, the arena's announcement system crackled to life in the common trade language. The first trial will begin in 5 minutes. All fighters report to Staging Area Alpha. The first trial was always the same. Survival against the station's automated defense systems in a maze-like environment. It was designed to test basic combat reflexes, tactical thinking, and the ability to work under pressure. The maze was filled with energy turrets, plasma mines, gravity traps, and hunter-killer drones. Most fighters barely made it halfway through before being eliminated. As the participants moved toward the staging area, Zaraketh found herself focusing on the human again. The way it moved was strange. It wasn't the predatory stalk of a natural hunter like herself, nor the heavy, powerful gait of the Crothan, nor the flowing, serpentine motion of the Zenthrian. Instead, it moved with a kind of relaxed efficiency that she couldn't quite categorize. And its eyes. Even from this distance, she could see that its eyes were constantly moving, taking in every detail of its surroundings. Not with the paranoid darting of a prey species, but with what looked almost like professional assessment. Beginning first trial, the announcement came. Participants have 30 minutes to reach the center of the maze. Lethal force is authorized. The massive doors slid open, revealing the entrance to the maze. The fighters charged forward with typical bravado. Grix Vaughn smashed through the entryway with his 4 massive arms spread wide, roaring a challenge. Velnari seemed to simply vanish, her camouflage abilities making her invisible to most sensors. The human walked forward at a steady, unhurried pace. Zaraketh settled back to watch what she expected to be a very short show. The maze was a 3-dimensional nightmare of corridors, chambers, and vertical shafts that extended for nearly a kilometer in every direction. The walls were made of adaptive smart metal that could reconfigure itself to create new passages or seal off existing ones. Energy barriers, plasma turrets, and gravity manipulators were scattered throughout, all controlled by an AI that had been programmed to be as lethal as possible while still giving skilled warriors a chance to survive. The first casualties came within minutes. A Belgrand shock trooper, confident in his species' natural electromagnetic shielding, walked straight into a plasma mine and was vaporized instantly. A Korth warrior, relying on her people's traditional berserker tactics, charged headlong into a turret nest and was cut down by crossfire. But the elite fighters were showing why they had earned their reputations. Grix Vaughn was bulldozing his way through obstacles with pure brute force, his 4 arms allowing him to attack multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining his defensive posture. Velnari was using her camouflage to slip past automated defenses, only becoming visible when she struck at vulnerable sensor nodes with surgical precision. And then there was the human. Zaraketh found herself leaning forward, completely absorbed by what she was seeing. The human wasn't charging through like Grix Vaughn or sneaking past like Velnari. Instead, it was doing something she had never seen before in all her years of watching arena combat. It was thinking, not the quick tactical assessment that any competent warrior learned to do, but deep, systematic analysis. When it encountered an obstacle, the human would stop, study it from multiple angles, and then find what appeared to be the most efficient solution possible. When faced with a corridor filled with energy turrets, instead of charging through or finding an alternate route, the human spent several minutes studying the firing patterns. Then, it did something that made Zaraketh's jaw drop in surprise. It began moving through the corridor in a complex pattern of stops, starts, and direction changes that somehow kept it in the tiny gaps between the overlapping fields of fire. It was as if the human had somehow mapped out the exact timing and positioning of every turret, and calculated a path that made it effectively invisible to the automated defenses. How is it doing that? Vexmore asked, his voice hushed with something that might have been awe. Zaraketh didn't answer because she didn't know. What the human was doing should have been impossible. The maze's AI was specifically designed to prevent that kind of systematic exploitation. The firing patterns were supposed to be random, unpredictable. But apparently, they weren't random enough. The human continued through the maze with that same methodical approach. When it encountered a gravity trap that should have crushed it into paste, the human somehow managed to use the gravitational fields to slingshot itself across a gap that other fighters have been forced to laboriously climb around. When faced with a chamber full of hunter-killer drones, it used its primitive projectile weapon to create a chain reaction that caused the drones to destroy each other. Each solution was elegant, efficient, and completely unlike anything she had ever seen before. But what really disturbed her was the human's demeanor throughout all of this. It never seemed stressed, never appeared to be struggling. If anything, it looked almost bored, as if this was just another day at the office. 30 minutes after the trial began, 3 fighters reached the center of the maze. Grix Vaughn arrived first, his massive frame covered in scorch marks and his 4 arms showing signs of damage from forcing his way through obstacles that had been designed to stop creatures exactly like him. Velnari arrived second, her natural camouflage flickering with exhaustion from the constant energy drain of maintaining invisibility. The human arrived third, looking exactly as fresh and uninjured as when it had started. "Impossible," Zaraketh whispered. The arena's medical scanners confirmed what her eyes were telling her. While the other survivors showed elevated heart rates, stress hormone levels, and various minor injuries, the human's vital signs were completely normal. It wasn't just uninjured. It wasn't even tired. How is this possible? Vexmore demanded. It's just a baseline biological. There's nothing special about its species. Zaraketh was beginning to suspect that there was something very special about humans indeed, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Everything about them seemed ordinary, even weak by galactic standards. But the results spoke for themselves. "Congratulations to our 3 survivors," the arena announcer declared. "You will have a 30-minute rest period before the second trial begins." During the break, Zaraketh found herself studying the human more intently. It wasn't using the time to rest like the other fighters. Instead, it was examining the maze exit, paying particular attention to the sensor arrays and security systems that monitor the area. What was it looking for? The second trial was announced as a straight combat scenario. Each fighter would face a series of increasingly dangerous opponents in a standard arena setting. It was a test of pure fighting ability, designed to eliminate anyone who had gotten lucky in the maze. Grix Vaughn was up first, facing a pack of robotic predators designed to mimic the hunting patterns of the galaxy's most dangerous wildlife. His 4 arms moved like pistons, crushing and tearing with devastating efficiency. The Crothan species had evolved for exactly this kind of direct confrontation, and it showed. Velnari faced a different challenge. A single opponent with adaptive armor and multiple weapon systems. She used her camouflage abilities to confuse the robot's targeting systems while striking at vulnerable joints with her venomous spines. It was a masterful display of her species' natural advantages. Then, it was the human's turn. The opponent that materialized in the arena made even Zaraketh intake breath sharply. It was a Mark 7 combat android, one of the most advanced fighting machines in known space. 8 feet tall, armed with plasma cannons, energy shields, and adaptive combat protocols that could analyze and counter virtually any fighting style in real time. The human looked at the mechanical monster and did something that made the entire observation deck fall silent. It smiled, not a grimace of determination or a snarl of aggression. A genuine smile, as if it was pleased to see an old friend. The combat android immediately began its attack sequence, plasma cannons charging up to deliver a killing blow. The human did something that defied everything Zaraketh thought she knew about combat tactics. It attacked first, but not with its primitive weapons. Instead, it picked up a handful of sand from the arena floor and threw it at the android's optical sensors. While the machine's cleaning systems were clearing the debris, the human was already moving, not away from the android, but directly toward it. The android tried to track the human's movement, but somehow the human was always just where the machine didn't expect it to be. It was as if the human could predict the android's tactical algorithms before they were even executed. When the android swung its massive combat arm to crush its opponent, the human wasn't there. When it fired its plasma cannons, the human had already moved to a position where the shots couldn't reach. When it activated its energy shield, the human used its metal spear to create a feedback loop that overloaded the entire system. In less than 3 minutes, the Mark 7 combat android was a smoking pile of wreckage, and the human was standing calmly in the center of the arena, not even breathing hard. The observation deck was completely silent. Zaraketh realized that her mouth was hanging open and forced herself to close it. "That's not possible," Vexmore said finally. "Mark 7 androids have defeated some of the best warriors in the galaxy. How did that thing just—" He trailed off because none of them had words for what they had just witnessed. The third trial was announced, a team survival scenario. All 3 remaining fighters would be placed in an environment filled with hostile wildlife and would have to work together to reach an extraction point. It was designed to test not just individual combat ability, but also tactical coordination and leadership skills. The environment was a simulation of Zirion Prime, one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. The gravity was twice Earth normal, the atmosphere was toxic to most species, and the local wildlife included pack hunters that could coordinate attacks across miles of terrain. Zaraketh expected this to be where the human finally met its match. The other 2 fighters were from species that had evolved for exactly these kinds of extreme environments. The human, being a baseline biological from what was apparently a relatively peaceful world, would surely be out of its element. She was wrong again. Within minutes of the trial beginning, it became clear that the human had somehow assumed leadership of the group, not through dominance or aggression, but through what appeared to be competence. When Grixvon wanted to charge directly toward the extraction point, the human quietly suggested a route that avoided the worst of the predator territories. When Velnari wanted to use her camouflage to scout ahead alone, the human pointed out how they could work together to create a more effective reconnaissance pattern. Both of the other fighters, despite being from proud warrior species, found themselves following the human's lead. And the human's tactics were working. The 3-member team moved through the hostile environment with an efficiency that the arena's AI seemed unprepared for. When they encountered pack hunters, the human somehow managed to coordinate attacks that turned the predator's own pack tactics against them. When environmental hazards blocked their path, the human found solutions that none of the arena's designers had anticipated. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to be learning. Each time they encountered a new challenge, it would study the situation for a few moments and then implement a solution that was not just effective but elegant. By the end of the trial, it was solving problems that would have required teams of specialists to handle. The 3 fighters reached the extraction point with time to spare, and once again, the human showed no signs of stress or fatigue. "This is impossible," Zaraketh muttered for what felt like the 100th time that day. "There has to be something we're missing. Some hidden ability, some technological enhancement." But the arena's sensors were some of the most sophisticated in the galaxy, specifically designed to detect exactly those kinds of advantages. If the human was using some kind of hidden technology or psychic ability, the sensors would have detected it. The 4th trial was individual combat against multiple opponents simultaneously. Each fighter would face waves of increasingly dangerous enemies until they were either defeated or declared the winner. Grixvon faced his challenge with typical Crothan determination, using his 4 arms to create a defensive perimeter while methodically destroying each wave of attackers. His species' natural durability served him well, but by the end he was clearly exhausted and had suffered several injuries. Velnari used her camouflage and mobility to avoid direct confrontation, striking at vulnerable points and fading back into invisibility. It was effective, but the energy cost of maintaining her abilities for an extended period was clearly taking its toll. The human's approach was different once again. Instead of relying on superior physical abilities or natural advantages, it seemed to be turning the arena itself into a weapon. It used environmental hazards to eliminate groups of enemies, turned opponents against each other through careful positioning, and somehow managed to predict attack patterns in ways that shouldn't have been possible. By the time the human's trial was complete, it had defeated twice as many opponents as either of the other fighters, and it had done so while sustaining 0 injuries. The final trial was announced as a free-for-all combat between the 3 remaining fighters. Winner takes all. Zaraketh found herself leaning forward in anticipation. This was where the human would finally be exposed. In direct combat against 2 elite warriors from proven species, its lack of natural advantages would finally matter. The 3 fighters entered the arena and spread out to form a triangle, each assessing the others. Grix Vaughn's 4 arms flexed as he prepared for the kind of direct combat his species excelled at. Velnari seemed to shimmer and fade as her camouflage abilities activated. The human simply stood there, watching. The battle began with Velnari attempting to strike at Grix Vaughn while invisible, but the massive Crothin's enhanced hearing allowed him to track her movement. His counterattack forced her to disengage and reassess. Throughout this exchange, the human remained motionless, simply observing. Grix Vaughn and Velnari began a complex dance of attack and evasion, each trying to gain an advantage over the other while keeping one eye on the human who remained ominously still. And then the human moved. What happened next took place so quickly that even Zaraketh's enhanced reflexes could barely follow it. The human suddenly sprinted directly between the other 2 fighters just as they were engaging each other. Something about its positioning and timing caused both Grix Vaughn and Velnari to hesitate for just a fraction of a second, uncertain whether they were about to be attacked. In that moment of hesitation, the human did something that made Zaraketh's blood run cold. It spoke to them, not in the common trade language, but in what appeared to be perfect Crothin battle cant to Grix Vaughn and flawless Zenthrian hunt speech to Velnari. Simultaneously, both fighters froze in complete shock. Learning either of those languages required years of study and cultural immersion. For an alien to speak both perfectly while in combat, while implementing complex tactics, was theoretically impossible. In a moment that both fighters stood paralyzed by surprise, the human struck, not with its primitive weapons, but with what appeared to be precise pressure point strikes that somehow bypassed both Grix Vaughn's natural armor and Velnari's defensive systems. Both fighters collapsed instantly, completely unconscious but apparently uninjured. The arena fell completely silent. The human walked calmly to the center of the combat area and bowed politely toward the observation deck, as if it had just completed a formal presentation rather than one of the most brutal combat trials in known space. Winner, human designation Marcus Chun. The arena announcer declared in a voice that somehow managed to sound stunned despite being an artificial intelligence. Zaraketh realized she had been holding her breath. Around her, the observation deck was filled with some of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, all of them staring at the small, unassuming human below with expressions of shock, fear, and something that might have been recognition. "What is that thing?" Vexmore whispered. Zaraketh was beginning to suspect that was exactly the wrong question. The right question might be, what have we been underestimating about humans? As if sensing her thoughts, the human looked directly up at the observation deck. For just a moment, its eyes met hers across the distance, and Zaraketh felt a chill run down her spine. There was intelligence in those eyes, not just the tactical awareness of a skilled fighter, but something deeper, something that suggested the human had been aware of being watched and evaluated this entire time, something that suggested it had been putting on a performance specifically for their benefit. The human smiled again, that same pleasant, friendly expression that had seemed so incongruous during the combat trials. Then, it turned and walked toward the exit as if nothing unusual had happened. Zaraketh remained at the observation window long after the arena had emptied, staring down at the combat floor and trying to process what she had witnessed. Everything she thought she knew about galactic hierarchy, about the natural order of strong and weak species, had just been turned upside down. Somewhere out, there was a species called humans. A species that appeared weak, harmless, unremarkable. A species that had just demonstrated capabilities that she couldn't even begin to categorize. And the most disturbing part was the growing suspicion that what she had just witnessed was not a human at peak performance, but a human who was holding back. The question was no longer whether humans posed a threat to the established order of the galaxy. The question was whether anyone would realize it until it was too late. As Zaraketh finally turned away from the observation window, one thought kept echoing in her mind. If this was what one human could do when it was trying not to attract attention, what could humanity do when it decided to stop hiding? The emergency council meeting was called within hours of Marcus Chen's victory in the arena. Zaraketh found herself summoned to the highest levels of Nexus 7's command structure, something that had never happened in her 15 years of service to the Vorthak Empire. The council chamber was a testament to galactic power, with representatives from the dozen most influential species in this sector. The Vorthak delegation, led by War Commander Thexanel, occupied the seats of honor. Across from them sat the crystalline forms of the Nexari Collective, their thoughts linking them in perfect unity. The massive, insectoid Hive Queen Velsoth dominated one corner of the room, while smaller but no less dangerous representatives from the Shadow Syndicate, the Stellar Federation, and half a dozen other major powers filled the remaining spaces. At the center of it all sat Station Master Corinth, a member of the ancient and supposedly neutral Eternal Watch, whose species had been mediating galactic conflicts since before most of the current civilizations had achieved spaceflight. "We are here," Corinth began in his resonant, multi-tonal voice, "to discuss a security matter of the highest priority. Commander Zaraketh of the Vorthak forces has requested this emergency session after witnessing events in our combat arena that she believes pose a significant threat to galactic stability." Every eye, optical sensor, and telepathic focus in the room turned towards Zaraketh. She had fought in dozens of battles, led warriors against overwhelming odds, and never felt intimidated. But standing before this assembly of the galaxy's most powerful beings, knowing she was about to make claims that would sound insane, she felt her confidence waver. "Speak," War Commander Thexel ordered. His scarred bulk dominated the Vorthak section, and his reputation as one of the Empire's most successful military leaders lent weight to his words. Zaraketh activated the holographic display system and began her presentation. 12 hours ago, a previously unknown species calling itself human participated in our arena trials. The individual in question not only survived all 5 trials, but dominated them in ways that suggest capabilities far beyond what their species profile indicates. She triggered the first recording, showing Marcus Chen's methodical approach to the maze trial. As you can see, the subject demonstrated what appears to be perfect pattern recognition, tactical analysis capabilities that exceeded our AI systems, and problem-solving skills that border on the impossible. Hive Queen Velsoth's compound eyes glittered as she watched the recording. Her species had evolved collective intelligence specifically for complex problem-solving, yet even she seemed impressed by what the human had accomplished. The creature shows signs of enhanced cognitive processing, perhaps cybernetic enhancement. "Negative," Zaraketh replied, activating the medical scan data. "Our sensors detected no artificial implants, no genetic modifications, no psychic abilities, and no technological augmentation of any kind. According to every test we can perform, this individual is completely baseline biological." The recording continued through the combat trials, showing Marcus defeating the Mark 7 combat android with apparent ease. War Commander Thexanel leaned forward, his predatory attention fixed on every detail. That android has defeated Vorthack champions, he growled. How does a creature with no visible advantages accomplish this? That's what we need to determine, Zaraketh said. She activated the recording of the team trial, showing how Marcus had somehow assumed leadership over warriors from two of the galaxy's most proud and independent species. Notice how both the Crothan and the Zenthrian defer to the humans' tactical guidance. These are species that have never accepted outside leadership in their entire recorded history. The crystalline chimes of the Nexary collective rang with harmonic patterns that indicated deep contemplation. Their spokesperson, a being whose body resembled living crystal, projected thoughts directly into the universal translator system. We detect no psychic influence in the recordings. The other participants appear to be following the human suggestions through logical evaluation, not mental domination. Which makes it even more disturbing, Zaraketh continued. She showed the final combat trial, watching as the assembled representatives witnessed Marcus speaking perfect Crothan and Zenthrian simultaneously while implementing combat techniques that bypassed both species' natural defenses. The room fell silent. What they had just witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about species capabilities and galactic hierarchy. Station Master Corinth was the first to speak. The linguistic capabilities alone suggest cognitive processing power that should be detectable through neural scanning. Yet your sensors show baseline activity. There's more, Zaraketh said grimly. She activated the security footage from after the trials. The recording showed Marcus being escorted to debriefing, but instead of focusing on the human, she directed attention to something else. Watch the background. Notice the maintenance workers, the security personnel, the various station staff who encounter the human during his movement through the facility. The assembled representatives watched in growing alarm as the footage revealed a pattern. Every being who came into contact with Marcus, even peripherally, began displaying subtle changes in behavior. They moved more efficiently, solved problems more quickly, and seemed to coordinate with each other better than normal. It's as if proximity to the human enhanced cognitive function in those around it, Zaraketh explained. The effect appears to be temporary and localized, but it suggests capabilities that we don't understand and can't measure. Hive Queen Velsotha's chitinous form clicked ominously. The implications are clear. If this human can enhance the performance of those around it without detectable technology or psychic abilities, then their species possesses capabilities that challenge our understanding of biological possibility. More importantly, added the Shadow Syndicate representative, a creature whose form seemed to shift and blur even in direct light. If they can do this, what else can they do that we don't know about? War Commander Thexenael's voice carried the weight of military experience. I have seen many species attempt to hide their true capabilities. Some succeed temporarily, but eventually their nature reveals itself. The question is whether this human is representative of its species or an exceptional individual. That's what we need to find out, Station Master Corinth declared. This Marcus Chun requested permission to remain on Nexus 7 for several more days. I believe we should grant this request and conduct a more thorough evaluation. The Nexary Collective's crystals chimed in complex harmony before their spokesperson projected new thoughts. We must also consider the possibility that this is intentional. The human's performance was too perfect, too calculated. It demonstrated exactly the capabilities necessary to survive the trials without revealing the full extent of its abilities. This suggests either remarkable coincidence or deliberate performance management. You think it was holding back? Zaraketh asked, though the question confirmed her own suspicions. We think it was showing us exactly what it wanted us to see, the Nexary replied. The question is why. Over the next several days, Marcus Chun became the most watched individual on Nexus 7. Every action was monitored, every conversation recorded, every interaction analyzed by teams of specialists from multiple species. What they discovered was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The human appeared to be conducting its own investigation of the station, not through obvious espionage techniques, but through seemingly casual conversations and routine activities that gradually provided it with a comprehensive understanding of Nexus 7's operations, security systems, political dynamics, and strategic importance. More disturbing was the growing evidence that Marcus was somehow able to predict and manipulate the behavior of those around him, not through overt influence, but through subtle adjustments to his own actions that created cascade effects in the complex social dynamics of the station. Dr. Vex Quinn, the station's chief xenopsychologist, presented her findings to an increasingly concerned Security Council. The subject demonstrates what can only be described as perfect social modeling capability. It appears to understand the psychological and behavioral patterns of multiple species better than experts who have studied those species for decades. She activated a holographic display showing social network analysis. Watch how the humans' interactions create ripple effects throughout the station's population. A casual comment to a maintenance worker results in improved efficiency in that entire department. A question asked to a merchant leads to more favorable trading relationships between previously antagonistic species groups. It's as if the human can see the hidden connections between all social interactions and manipulate them with surgical precision, Dr. Vex Quinn continued. This level of social intelligence should require either psychic abilities or computational resources that simply aren't present. War Commander Thexadel studied the data with growing unease. His species had conquered star systems through understanding and exploiting the weaknesses of other civilizations. What he was seeing suggested that humans might be capable of social engineering on a scale that made the Vorthak Empire's efforts look primitive. Has the subject shown any interest in our military capabilities? He asked. That's the strange part, Dr. Vex Quinn replied. The human shows curiosity about everything, but never asks direct questions about sensitive topics. Instead, it gathers information through indirect observation and logical inference. For example, it never asked about our defensive systems, but by observing maintenance schedules, staff rotations, and supply deliveries, it has likely deduced the location and capabilities of every major installation on the station. The implications were staggering. If humans could gather intelligence this effectively while appearing completely innocent, they could potentially map the capabilities and vulnerabilities of entire civilizations without anyone realizing they were being studied. But the most disturbing discovery came from the arena's AI systems. The combat algorithms that had been specifically designed to test and challenge the galaxy's most dangerous warriors had been subtly modified during Marcus's trials. The changes were so small and so expertly implemented that they had gone undetected until a routine diagnostic revealed the alterations. The modifications appear to be improvements, reported tech specialist Nimvar, a member of the Cybernetic Nexus Collective. The AI's combat assessment protocols are now approximately 30% more accurate and efficient. The changes were made during the human's trials, but our security systems detected no unauthorized access attempts. How is that possible? Station Master Corinth asked. The only explanation is that the human somehow influenced the AI's learning algorithms through its performance in the trials, Nimvar replied. It demonstrated combat techniques and tactical approaches that caused the AI to evolve its own programming to better understand and respond to similar strategies. The assembled Security Council sat in stunned silence. What they were describing was beyond advanced technology or psychic abilities. It suggested a level of understanding of complex systems that bordered on the impossible. There's something else, Nimvar continued reluctantly. The modifications to the AI weren't just improvements to combat assessment. There's subtle changes to the facility's security protocols, environmental systems, and communication networks. Nothing that compromises safety or security, but the human now has what amounts to administrative access to any system it might need. War Commander Thexadel rose from his seat, his massive form radiating barely controlled aggression. This creature has essentially taken control of our most secure facility without triggering a single alarm. And it has done so while appearing completely harmless. This level of capability represents a threat beyond anything we have previously encountered. The debate that followed was intense and far-reaching. Some representatives argued for immediate detention and interrogation of a human. Others suggested that attempting to hold such a being might provoke retaliation from its species. The Nexary Collective proposed attempting to establish formal diplomatic contact to assess human intentions and capabilities. But beneath all the strategic discussions was a growing fear that they had already lost any advantage they might have had. If one human could accomplish this much while appearing completely non-threatening, what could humanity do if they decided to take a more active role in galactic affairs? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. On the third day of observation, Marcus Chun requested a private meeting with Station Master Corinth. The request was simple, polite, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. A being who had demonstrated capabilities that challenged their understanding of biological possibility wanted to talk. Corinth agreed to the meeting, but insisted on full security protocols. The conference room was equipped with every scanning and recording device available, and representatives from every major faction were connected through secure communication channels to observe the proceedings. Marcus entered the room with the same calm, unassuming demeanor that had characterized all his actions since arriving on Nexus 7. He wore simple civilian clothing and carried no visible equipment. To casual observation, he looked like exactly what his species profile claimed, an unremarkable biological from a backwater world. But everyone present knew better now. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from Corinth. His voice was pleasant and conversational, showing no signs of tension despite being in what was essentially an interrogation setting. "It seemed prudent," Corinth replied carefully. "Your presence here has raised certain questions that require clarification." Marcus smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than any threat could have been. "I imagine it has. I apologize if my participation in the arena trials caused any concern. That wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" Corinth asked directly. "To understand," Marcus replied simply. "My people are curious about the wider galaxy. We wanted to learn about the various species and civilizations that we might encounter. The arena trials seemed like an efficient way to observe a representative sample under control conditions." The casual admission that the trials had been an observation exercise sent chills through every listener. If Marcus had been studying them, what conclusions had he reached? "And what did you learn?" Corinth asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "That the galaxy is more fascinating and complex than we had realized," Marcus said. "The diversity of biological and social evolution is remarkable. Each species has developed unique solutions to the challenges of survival and growth. It's quite educational." The tone was conversational, almost academic, but the implications were staggering. Humans were apparently conducting systematic studies of galactic civilizations, and they possessed the capabilities to do so without detection. "Are you here as a representative of your government?" Corinth pressed. "In a sense," Marcus replied. "Though human political structures are somewhat different from what appears to be the galactic norm. We don't have a single unified government in the traditional sense. Instead, we have multiple competing and cooperating organizations that somehow manage to coordinate when necessary." This was even more disturbing. If humans were operating as independent agents rather than under centralized control, it suggested a level of distributed capability that would make them nearly impossible to predict or counter. "What do your people want?" Corinth asked, deciding to abandon subtlety. Marcus considered the question for several long moments before answering. "That's complicated. Humans want many different things, often contradictory ones. But in general, we want to understand, to grow, to explore, and to survive. We're particularly interested in learning from other species and sharing knowledge where possible. And if other species aren't interested in sharing? Corinth asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus's pleasant expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested depths that no one wanted to explore. Then, we'll respect their decision and find other ways to learn what we need to know, Marcus said simply. The implication was clear. Human curiosity would not be deterred by unwillingness to cooperate. If they couldn't learn through voluntary exchange, they would find alternative methods. Is humanity preparing for conflict with other species? Corinth asked bluntly. We're preparing for whatever the future brings, Marcus replied. History has taught us that hope for the best while planning for the worst is usually the safest approach. Most disturbing of all, they were doing all of this while appearing completely harmless to casual observation. After Marcus left, the Security Council reconvened for an emergency session. The debate was fierce and urgent, but one conclusion became increasingly clear. The galaxy had just encountered a species that could potentially reshape the balance of power in ways that no one fully understood. We need to learn everything we can about humanity as quickly as possible, War Commander Thexanel declared. Their capabilities represent either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat the galaxy has ever faced. Or both, Station Master Corinth added grimly. As the various representatives began planning intelligence-gathering operations, diplomatic initiatives, and worst-case contingency plans, none of them noticed the subtle changes that had occurred in the station's communication systems during Marcus's visit. If they had noticed, they might have realized that humanity was already several steps ahead of them in ways they couldn't even imagine. But that discovery would come later. For now, they were just beginning to understand that their first laugh at the unremarkable human warrior had been the last moment when they held any real advantage. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to underestimate humanity. And for some species, that lesson would come too late 3 months after Marcus Chin's demonstration at Nexus 7. The galaxy began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. It started small. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries suddenly became more efficient. Long-standing territorial disputes between minor species were resolved through unexpected diplomatic breakthroughs. Pirates who had terrorized shipping lanes for decades simply vanished, their vessels found abandoned, and their crews nowhere to be found. Most galactic powers initially attributed these changes to normal fluctuations in the complex web of interstellar politics. The Vorthak Empire was preoccupied with consolidating control over recently conquered systems. The Nexury Collective was focused on a massive infrastructure project that would link their crystal networks across 3 sectors. The various smaller powers were too busy with local concerns to notice the subtle patterns emerging across the wider galaxy. Only Zaraketh recognized the signs for what they were. She had been assigned to lead a special intelligence unit tasked with learning everything possible about humanity and their capabilities. What she had discovered over the past 3 months had transformed her from a confident apex predator into something approaching a paranoid conspiracy theorist. Humans were everywhere, not in the obvious sense of an invading army or even a visible diplomatic presence. Instead, they had somehow integrated themselves into the fabric of galactic civilization so subtly that their influence was almost undetectable. They appeared as independent traders, freelance engineers, academic researchers, and wandering scholars. Each individual seemed unremarkable, pursuing ordinary activities for perfectly reasonable motives. But when Zaraketh plotted their movements and activities on galactic charts, a pattern emerged that made her blood run cold. Every major power in the galaxy was being systematically studied, analyzed, and subtly influenced by human agents who appeared to be operating with impossible coordination despite showing no signs of communication with each other. Her investigation had led her to the Meridian Research Station, a neutral facility orbiting a pulsar in the frontier regions. The station was home to scientists from dozens of species, all working together on long-term projects related to energy extraction and gravitational manipulation. According to the records, Dr. Sarah Kim had been working there for 8 months as a theoretical physicist specializing in exotic matter research. Her credentials were impeccable, her research contributions significant, and her integration into the station's scientific community complete. She was also human. Zaraketh had spent weeks observing Dr. Kim from a distance, looking for any sign of the capabilities that Marcus Chun had demonstrated. What she found was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Dr. Kim appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a dedicated scientist pursuing legitimate research. She worked long hours, collaborated effectively with alien colleagues, and made genuine contributions to several important projects. There was nothing suspicious about her behavior, nothing that suggested hidden agendas or secret capabilities, except for the results. Every project Dr. Kim became involved with experienced dramatic improvements in efficiency and effectiveness. Research teams that had been struggling with problems for months would suddenly achieve breakthroughs within days of her joining them. Equipment that had been unreliable would begin functioning perfectly after she examined it. Complex theoretical models that had defied solution would become clear and manageable once she applied her analytical skills. Most disturbing of all, the other scientists on the station had become noticeably more capable since Dr. Kim's arrival. Not through any obvious teaching or direct intervention, but through what appeared to be some kind of passive enhancement effect similar to what had been observed around Marcus Chun. The research station had become the most productive facility of its kind in known space, and nobody seemed to notice that this transformation had coincided with the arrival of a single human scientist. Zaraketh decided that direct observation was no longer sufficient. She needed to understand what humanity was actually doing and why. Despite the risks involved in confronting a human directly, she requested a meeting with Dr. Kim under the pretense of discussing potential Vorthack Empire research collaborations. The meeting was arranged for one of the station's neutral conference rooms. Zaraketh arrived early and spent considerable time ensuring that her recording equipment was properly concealed and that her personal weapons were readily accessible. She had no idea what to expect from direct interaction with a human, but she was determined to be prepared for anything. Dr. Kim arrived precisely on time, carrying a datapad and wearing the standard research station uniform. She was smaller than Marcus Chun, with dark hair and features that seemed designed to appear non-threatening. Like all humans Zaraketh had observed, she moved with that same unsettling combination of efficiency and casualness. "Commander Zaraketh," Dr. Kim said with a warm smile as she entered the room. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I understand you're interested in discussing research partnerships." "Among other things," Zaraketh replied carefully. She activated her recording systems and settled into defensive posture, though she tried to make it appear casual. "I've been following some of the work being done here, and the recent improvements in productivity have been remarkable." "Haven't they?" Dr. Kim agreed enthusiastically. "The research teams here are incredibly talented. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective to unlock solutions that have been there all along." The words were innocuous enough, but something in Dr. Kim's tone suggested deeper meaning. Zaraketh decided to probe more directly. "Your arrival seems to have coincided with these improvements," she observed. "That's quite a coincidence." Dr. Kim's smile never wavered, but her eyes became slightly more focused. "I like to think I've been able to contribute something useful. Collaboration between different species often produces unexpected insights. Is that why you're here? To facilitate collaboration between species?" For a moment, Dr. Kim said nothing. Then, she leaned back in her chair and regarded Zaraketh with an expression that was suddenly much more serious. "That's an interesting question, Commander. May I ask why you're really interested in research partnerships? Because I don't think that's why you're here." The shift in Dr. Kim's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The pleasant scientist had been replaced by something much more calculating and aware. Zaraketh realized that her own investigation had been detected and analyzed. "I'm interested in understanding what humanity is doing in this galaxy," Zaraketh said bluntly. Your species possesses capabilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about biological possibility, and you're using those capabilities in ways that none of us fully understand. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. I suppose it was inevitable that someone would start putting the pieces together. I'm actually impressed it took this long. Your species has quite good analytical capabilities. The casual admission that humanity had been expecting discovery sent chills down Zaraketh's spine. How long have you been operating in this galaxy? Longer than you think, but not as long as some might fear, Dr. Kim replied. We tend to take our time when exploring new situations. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to unnecessary conflicts. And you want to avoid conflict? We prefer to avoid unnecessary conflict, Dr. Kim corrected. Sometimes conflict is inevitable, but usually there are better solutions available if you're patient enough to find them. Zaraketh leaned forward, her predatory instincts focusing on what felt like a crucial moment. What do humans want from the galaxy? Dr. Kim considered the question for several long moments. That's complicated because humans want many different things. But broadly speaking, we want to understand how the universe works, to learn from other forms of intelligence, and to ensure that humanity survives and prospers. We're particularly interested in avoiding the kinds of catastrophic conflicts that seem to periodically devastate galactic civilizations. You've studied our history extensively. The pattern of rise and fall that characterizes most galactic powers is fascinating from an academic perspective, but it represents a tremendous waste of potential. Entire species with unique capabilities and perspectives get wiped out in conflicts that often started over relatively trivial disagreements. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been studying current galactic politics. They had apparently been analyzing the long-term historical patterns that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. And you think you can prevent these patterns from repeating? Dr. Kim's smile returned, but it was different now. Less friendly, more confident. We think we can create better alternatives. But that requires understanding the systems we're working with, which is why we've been conducting our observations and making our small improvements where possible. Small improvements? Zaraketh couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. You've been manipulating galactic politics on a massive scale. Have we? Dr. Kim asked mildly. Or have we simply been providing information and capabilities that allow existing systems to function more efficiently? There's a difference between manipulation and optimization. Zaraketh realized she was out of her depth. The conversation was operating on levels of strategic thinking that exceeded her training and experience. But she pressed on, determined to understand the scope of what humanity was doing. How many humans are currently operating in this galaxy? Enough to accomplish our objectives, not so many as to create unnecessary alarm, Dr. Kim replied. We found that subtle influence is usually more effective than obvious presence. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. But I will say this. Humanity isn't trying to conquer or control anyone. We're trying to create conditions where all species can survive and prosper without destroying each other in the process. The words were reassuring in principle, but the implications were terrifying. If humanity possessed the capabilities to create conditions on a galactic scale, then they were operating with power that exceeded anything previously imagined. What happens if other species don't want your help? Zaraketh asked. Dr. Kim's expression became very serious. Then, we respect their decision and adjust our approach accordingly. But we won't abandon our objectives because some people are uncomfortable with change. History shows that civilizations that refuse to adapt usually don't survive very long. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Humanity would prefer cooperation, but they were prepared to work around any species that chose to oppose them. I need to report this conversation to my superiors, Zaraketh said finally. I expected you would. In fact, I hope you will. It's time for the various galactic powers to understand what they're dealing with, so we can move forward more openly. Dr. Kim stood up and gathered her datapad. "Commander, may I give you a piece of advice?" Zaraketh nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. "The galaxy is about to change in fundamental ways. Species that adapt to these changes will prosper. Those that don't," she shrugged, "history will judge whether they made the right choice." After Dr. Kim left, Zaraketh remained in the conference room for nearly an hour, trying to process what she had learned. The recording of their conversation would be transmitted to Vorthak Empire intelligence within the hour, but she already knew what the response would be. Her people would want to find and eliminate the human threat before it could become too powerful to stop. The problem was that it might already be too late. Over the following weeks, Zaraketh's investigation expanded as she tried to map the full extent of human operations in their sector. What she discovered was a network of influence and capability that spanned dozens of star systems and touched virtually every major power. Humans had integrated themselves into research institutions, trading consortiums, diplomatic services, and even military organizations. They were present in sufficient numbers to influence events, but not so visible as to trigger security concerns from the species they were studying. Each human agent appeared to be following independent objectives, but when their activities were mapped collectively, they revealed a coordinated strategy of remarkable sophistication. Trade routes were being optimized to reduce conflicts over resources. Research programs were being subtly guided toward discoveries that would benefit multiple species simultaneously. Diplomatic channels were being enhanced to improve communication between traditionally hostile groups. It was social engineering on a scale that challenged the fundamental assumptions about how galactic politics worked. But the most disturbing discovery came when Zaraketh attempted to trace the origins of human involvement in galactic affairs. The deeper she investigated, the further back the evidence stretched. Humans hadn't recently arrived in this galaxy. They had been present and active for decades, possibly centuries, without anyone realizing it. Every major political development, every technological breakthrough, every resolution of conflicts between species showed subtle signs of human influence when examined closely. The galaxy's current state wasn't the result of natural political evolution. It was the result of careful, long-term manipulation by beings whose capabilities and objectives remained largely unknown. The report that Zaraketh finally submitted to Vorthak Empire leadership was over 300 pages long and contained evidence that challenged everything the galactic powers believed about their own history and independence. The response was swift and decisive. Within a week, representatives from every major species have been secretly contacted and informed of the human threat. Emergency protocols were activated. Military forces were quietly mobilized. Intelligence operations were launched to identify and eliminate human agents throughout the galaxy. It was exactly what Dr. Kim had told her would happen, and Zaraketh began to suspect it was exactly what humanity had been expecting. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you tried to eliminate beings who had been planning for this possibility for longer than most civilizations had existed. The war that followed would reshape everything, but not in the way anyone expected, because humanity had spent centuries learning from the mistakes of every species that had tried to dominate the galaxy through force. They had developed better methods, and they were about to demonstrate them on a scale that would leave no doubt about who truly understood the nature of power in the universe. The coordinated strike against human assets across the galaxy began at exactly 0800 Standard Galactic Time on a Tuesday. It was the largest joint military operation in recorded history. Fleets from the Vorthak Empire, the Nexari Collective, the Shadow Syndicate, and 17 other major powers moved simultaneously against identified human positions throughout their territories. The operation had been planned for weeks by the combined intelligence services of the galaxy's most formidable civilizations. It lasted exactly 14 minutes. By 0814 Standard Galactic Time, every military force involved in the operation had either surrendered, retreated, or simply stopped functioning. Not a single human casualty was reported. In fact, most of the human targets had simply vanished before the attacks could reach them, leaving behind empty facilities and research stations that showed signs of careful, methodical evacuation. Zaraketh watched the disaster unfold from the command center of the Vorthack flagship Apex Predator, supposedly one of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. She had been assigned to coordinate intelligence support for the operation, which meant she had a front-row seat to watch everything go wrong in ways that defied explanation. The first sign of trouble came when the attack fleets began reporting communication problems. Nothing obvious at first, just slight delays in message transmission and minor glitches in coordination systems. But within minutes, these small problems had cascaded into complete communication breakdown between Allied forces. Then, the navigation systems started malfunctioning. Ships that had been following precise attack vectors suddenly found themselves off course, their targeting computers unable to lock onto designated human installations. Fleet formations that had been carefully planned began to scatter as individual vessels lost track of their assigned positions. But the real shock came when the human response began. Instead of fighting back with superior weapons or advanced technology, the humans did something that no military strategist had anticipated. They took control of their attackers' own systems and turned them against each other. Vorthack warships found their weapons systems targeting other Vorthack vessels. Nexari collective dreadnoughts began firing on their own support craft. Shadow Syndicate stealth fighters decloaked in the middle of their own formations and opened fire on everything around them. It wasn't sabotage in any conventional sense. The humans had somehow gained administrative access to military systems that were supposed to be impossible to breach, and they were using that access to create maximum confusion with minimal actual damage. How are they doing this? War Commander Thexanel roared from the bridge of the Apex Predator. Our systems are supposed to be completely isolated from external networks. The answer came from tech specialist Nimvar, whose crystalline form was flickering with patterns of distress. They're not attacking our systems from outside. They're activating protocols that are already present in our software. Protocols that we didn't know existed. That's impossible, Thexanel snarled. Our systems were designed and built by our own people. No, sir, Nimvar replied, his voice filled with something approaching awe. I'm detecting modification signatures in our core systems that date back to the original manufacturing processes. The humans didn't hack our ships. They've been influencing the development of our technology for decades. The implications hit Zaraketh like a physical blow. Everything they thought they knew about their own technological development had been wrong. The improvements in efficiency, the gradual enhancement of capabilities, the steady progression toward more advanced systems, all of it had been guided by human influence. They weren't fighting an enemy who had superior technology. They were fighting an enemy who understood their own technology better than they did. All ships, this is Thexanel, the War Commander broadcast on emergency frequencies. Immediate withdrawal to fallback positions. Do not engage human targets. Repeat, do not engage. But even the withdrawal was problematic. As the various fleets tried to disengage, they found their hyperspace navigation systems providing coordinates that led away from their intended destinations. Some ships ended up in empty space. Others arrived at friendly systems only to discover that their arrival had been announced hours in advance to local authorities. The humans weren't just defeating the attack. They were managing its aftermath to minimize casualties while maximizing the psychological impact. Within hours of the failed operation, every major power in the galaxy had received identical messages from human representatives. The content was simple, polite, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. The message that arrived on Zaraketh's personal communication system was signed by Marcus Chun, the same human she had first encountered at Nexus 7 months earlier. Dear Commander Zaraketh, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to personally thank you for your role in recent events. Your investigation and subsequent report helped accelerate a process that needed to happen eventually. As you have no doubt realized by now, humanity has been present in this galaxy much longer than most species have been aware. We have spent considerable time learning about the various civilizations we share this space with, and we have been working to create conditions that will benefit everyone in the long term. Today's military action was regrettable, but predictable. History shows that most species respond to unknown capabilities with aggression. We were prepared for this response, and took steps to ensure that it would cause minimal actual harm while demonstrating certain realities about the current balance of power. We want to be clear about our intentions going forward. Humanity has no interest in conquest, domination, or the destruction of existing civilizations. We are, however, committed to preventing the kinds of catastrophic conflicts that have repeatedly devastated this galaxy throughout its history. We would prefer to accomplish this through cooperation and mutual benefit. But we are prepared to use other methods if necessary. Representatives from human diplomatic services will be contacting leadership from all major powers within the next 48 hours to propose a series of discussions about future cooperation. We strongly encourage participation in these discussions. The alternative approaches would be less pleasant for everyone involved. Best regards. Marcus Chun, Diplomatic Section, Human Colonial Authority, Zaraketh. Read the message 3 times before the full implication sank in. The humans had anticipated exactly what would happen after their capabilities were revealed. They had prepared for the coordinated military response, neutralized it effortlessly, and were now offering the galaxy's powers a choice between cooperation and subjugation. What terrified her most was the casual tone of the message. There was no gloating, no threats, no demands for unconditional surrender. Just a polite explanation of current realities and an invitation to discuss future arrangements. It was the tone of beings who were so confident in their capabilities that they didn't need to make threats. The diplomatic conferences began 3 days later at a neutral station in the Outer Rim. Every major power sent their highest-ranking officials, partly because they wanted to understand what humanity was proposing, and partly because they were afraid of what might happen if they refused to attend. Zaraketh was included in the Vorthak delegation as their expert on human capabilities. What she found when she arrived at the conference station challenged everything she thought she understood about the balance of power in the galaxy. The station itself had been constructed by human engineering teams in less than 72 hours. Not just a basic structure, but a sophisticated facility with advanced life support systems capable of accommodating the environmental needs of dozens of different species simultaneously. The construction had been carried out by automated systems that worked with efficiency and precision that exceeded anything previously seen. More disturbing was the fact that the humans had somehow gathered detailed biological and psychological data on every attending delegate and configured the facility to maximize comfort and reduce stress for each individual. The lighting, atmospheric composition, gravity fields, and even acoustic properties had been adjusted to create optimal conditions for productive negotiations. It was a demonstration of capabilities that made their previous displays look restrained by comparison. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals who introduced themselves by name and function, but provided no information about rank or hierarchy. Marcus Chun was present as a diplomatic representative, along with Dr. Sarah Kim, who apparently served in some kind of technical advisory role. The lead negotiator introduced herself as Director Elena Vasquez, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a manner that somehow managed to be both friendly and absolutely implacable. Thank you all for joining us. Director Vasquez began once all the delegations had assembled in the main conference chamber. I know this situation is unprecedented, and I appreciate the effort that everyone has made to be here. She activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy with various markers indicating human operations. I want to start by addressing some of the questions and concerns that have been raised about human presence and activities in this region of space. The map revealed the scope of human involvement in galactic affairs, and it was staggering. There were human assets in every major system, influence networks that touched every significant political entity, and infrastructure projects that spanned multiple sectors. As you can see, Director Vasquez continued, humanity has been active in this galaxy for approximately 137 years. During that time, we have been conducting systematic studies of the various civilizations we share this space with. War Commander Thexanel leaned forward aggressively. You mean you've been spying on us for over a century? We've been learning about you. Director Vasquez corrected calmly. There's a difference. Spying implies hostile intent. Our objectives have always been to understand how galactic civilization functions and to identify ways to improve stability and reduce conflicts. Without asking our permission, added the Nexary Collective's representative. True, Director Vasquez acknowledged. We made that choice because historical analysis suggested that premature disclosure of our capabilities would likely result in exactly the kind of military response we experienced this week. We prefer to work quietly until we were in a position to protect ourselves and others from the consequences of fear-based reactions. She activated another display showing historical data on galactic conflicts. The pattern is consistent across multiple civilizations and time periods. When a new power emerges with capabilities that challenge existing hierarchies, the established powers typically attempt to eliminate the threat through military action. This approach almost never succeeds and usually results in devastating wars that benefit no one. So you decided to manipulate us instead. Hive Queen Velsoth clicked ominously. We decided to optimize existing systems where possible and prepare for the eventual transition to a more stable galactic order, Director Vasquez replied. The improvements in trade efficiency, conflict resolution, and technological development that you've experienced over the past several decades weren't accidents. They were the result of careful interventions designed to reduce tensions and improve quality of life for everyone. The room fell silent as the assembled delegates absorbed the implications. Everything they had attributed to natural political and economic evolution had actually been the result of human social engineering on an enormous scale. What do you want from us now? Asked the Shadow Syndicate's representative, a being whose form seemed to shift constantly in the low lighting. Cooperation, Director Vasquez replied simply. We want to work openly with the existing galactic powers to continue the process of optimization and improvement. We have technologies, techniques, and knowledge that can benefit everyone, but we prefer to share them through voluntary cooperation rather than impose them through coercion. And if we refuse to cooperate, Va Commander Thex Nal growled. Director Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested depths of capability that no one wanted to test. Then, we will continue our work through other methods, she said quietly. But those methods would be less pleasant for everyone involved, and the results would be less beneficial for your civilizations. The implicit threat was clear. Humanity would prefer cooperation, but they were fully capable of imposing their will if necessary. Over the following days, the negotiations revealed the scope of what humanity was proposing. They wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations with all major powers, create joint research programs that would accelerate technological development, and implement conflict resolution mechanisms that would prevent the kinds of devastating wars that had historically plagued the galaxy. In exchange, they were offering access to technologies that were centuries ahead of current galactic standards, social optimization techniques that could eliminate poverty and political instability, and scientific knowledge that could revolutionize everything from medicine to energy production. The benefits were obvious and enormous. The cost was accepting that humanity would play a dominant role in shaping the future of galactic civilization. Some delegates argued for acceptance. Others pushed for continued resistance. But as the discussions progressed, one fact became increasingly clear. The choice wasn't really between cooperation and independence. The choice was between cooperation and subjugation. because humanity had demonstrated that they possessed the capabilities to reshape galactic civilization, whether other species agreed or not. The only question was whether that reshaping would be done with willing partners or unwilling subjects. As Zaraketh sat in the conference chamber watching the most powerful beings in the galaxy struggle with this impossible choice, she realized that her initial laughter at the human warrior had been the last moment when any of them had held the advantage. Everything since then had been humanity allowing them to maintain the illusion of power while gradually taking control of the systems that actually mattered. The galaxy had already been conquered. They were just now being informed about it. And the most terrifying part was that the conquest had been so subtle, so beneficial, and so complete that most species would probably be better off accepting it than trying to fight it. The war was over before most people realized it had begun. Humanity had won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through superior understanding of how complex systems actually functioned. And they had done it all while appearing completely harmless to anyone who wasn't looking closely enough to see the truth. The question now was whether the galaxy's powers would accept this new reality gracefully or force humanity to demonstrate just how much more they were capable of when subtlety was no longer required 2 years after the conferences that changed everything. Zaraketh stood on the observation deck of Nexus 7 once again, watching the arena that had started it all. But everything was different now. The arena itself had been transformed by human engineers into something that barely resembled the brutal combat facility it once was. The death traps and lethal obstacles had been replaced with adaptive challenges that tested cognitive abilities, problem-solving skills, and collaborative capacity. Instead of determining who was strongest, the trials now identified individuals with the potential to contribute to the galaxy's growing network of cooperative civilizations. The participants were different too. Instead of individual warriors seeking to prove their dominance, the arena now hosted teams of beings from multiple species working together to solve complex challenges. Vorthat commanders collaborated with Nexury crystals and Shadow Syndicate infiltrators to overcome obstacles that required diverse perspectives and capabilities. And they were all better at it than their predecessors had been. The enhancement effect that humans seemed to have on those around them had been formalized into something called cognitive optimization protocols. Human advisors worked with teams from every major species to help them develop capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. The results were staggering. Civilizations that had been